Good. We had just more people join us. Okay, off we go.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you very much, guys, for joining us for a webinar on learning design research. The title of the webinar is around continuing the discourse, and it's going to be facilitated by myself. I'm Panos Vlachopoulos from Macquarie University, and from Eva, that she will also introduce herself. Just quickly, myself, Panos Vlachopoulos, Macquarie University, in the Faculty of Arts. I'm the Associate Dean Quality and Standards over the last year now in the faculty, and my main responsibilities are around quality assuring all the programs in the faculty, including the ones that are related to online delivery. Personally, I have an interest in learning design as a researcher, as an academic. I've been researching the area of online tutoring facilitation now for a number of years. And since my arrival in Australia over now 3.5 years ago, I had the privilege to get to meet a number of quality academics in that space, including Eva Dobozy, but also Leanne Cameron, that I can see in the list. Through now over a year, we've been starting debating all these ideas about learning design and how we can move the field forward. So that's all from me. Eva, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Panos. Well, my name is Eva Dobozy. I'm from Curtin University in beautiful Perth. And I've been working in the learning design space for a number of years, for many years now. And I'm Deputy Dean Learning and Teaching at the Curtin Business School at Curtin University. And I've been charged with curriculum innovation and program innovation and making sure that we can move the business education forward, and particularly in the e-learning space.
Perfect. Eva, before we move on, shall we say a couple of things like housekeeping?
Sure. Everyone, thanks very much, everyone, for joining us. Housekeeping, it's really important that please, if you want to test your mic, please do so now. And if you also like to chat online, I will be monitoring the online chat. If someone wants to pose a question, I will make sure that this is answered. And also, if you like to zoom in or zoom out, on the left-hand side of your screen, you have a zoom in, zoom out button. We do have some graphs that sometimes are not easy to see, so you can zoom them in and you can move with the cursor up, so you can position the graph in the center of your screen. And please put your hands up if you'd like to talk, using your audio or your chat function on the side.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Eva, for that. So with this note, we will actually start the actual part of the presentation. So it is a webinar. We are all remotely connected through our offices, our houses. So it's very important that we try to stay focused and we try to be on time. So we'll have a series of slides, and there will be opportunities for you either to join the discussion through using your microphones, or as Eva said, just by putting it in the chat, and we should be able to make sense of it. So just a quick overview of what is going to be the presentation and discussion today. We thought that the most important thing to do as people interested in learning design is to try to come to some sort of an answer to a number of questions that I'm sure all of us were struggling over the last few years when it comes to learning design. It's very important to start, and we will start by asking actually, what do we know about learning design? There's so much things happening in that space over the last few years in terms of frameworks, models, approaches. What are they and what actually do they do? Then we will move on by considering the why question. Why actually do we do it? What actually is the reasons around it? And once we know the why, we need to move to the how. How do we do it? Is there one approach? Are there many approaches? And if we can also be reflective and ask the question, how well do we do it for our own programs and also for programs of other people? And then we move to the more critical questions that they are about, so what? What actually does learning design contribute to the everyday practice in the universities? I'm the Associate Dean Learning and Teaching. Eva is the Deputy Dean in Learning and Teaching as well. We're all using learning design to some extent, but what actually does it do for our universities, for our academics? And are there particular challenges and issues and gaps? And once we address this as much as we can in the time we have, I think it is important, given that this is a presentation as part of a SIG, a special interest group on learning design, to come together and try to agree the now what. What else should we be doing in terms of learning design as a community, as a research, as development. So if that's okay with the agenda, I will move on, and hopefully we'll have time to go through each of them. Now, what I put here in this slide together with Eva is a wordle, like a cloud of words, which represent some of the most important or the most referenced and used words in the literature of learning design. So Eva had the initiative to write a very well thought out blog, which I contribute to, and the blog post will become available, I think, next week through the SIG website. And in that blog entry, she created a fascinating, I'm talking fascinating because it's very interesting to read it, table with a number of definitions around learning design. So I took the initiative and I collected all these definitions and I put it through this word cloud system, and this is what we came with. And it's good because it's reassuring that what we do as learning designers is spot on. We do things that are about learning, and you can see here that the bigger the number, the font of the letter, it means that it's more referent.
So if I can interject here, I think what is really interesting, excuse me, Panos?
Go on.
Of course, we talk about learning design, so learning design is really prominent. Activities is also really prominent. And then what we see is framework. What is missing is model and methodology. So that's really interesting for our continuing discussion today. I'm handing over back.
Absolutely spot on this one. And I was about to say that even the word framework, it is mentioned a number of times. As we will unpack it today, it's an interesting opportunity for us to discuss what do we mean by framework. So yeah, on that space, I will move on with the next slide that actually take us now into the core of this particular literature. So what we put here is a good representative example of key publications in terms of books around learning design. They are not put there in any particular order in terms of, like the publication or anything, but they represent the spectrum of books and what people are interested on. Some of these books have been around now for a number of years. Some of them are newest. And I will start by saying that one of the most complete books when it comes to learning design is the book that it is on the left of the slide, which is edited by James Dargell and another group of teams, but they're part of the SIG, including Eva, Liane, and other academics from around the world. And it's called The Learning Design. And in there, you will see one of the most complete frameworks for learning design, together with guidelines and information. But I will leave Eva to elaborate a bit more later on about this. In the second book, we have The Art and Science of Learning Design. You can zoom in and zoom out from this slide in your own pace if you want to have a better look. Eva talked to you about how you can do that using the top left of the screen. So if you cannot see it, you can zoom in and you can see it is a publication about learning design. And in that particular book, we do have a collected set of case studies from a number of disciplines and a number of universities about how they do learning design, and they move on touching on what is widely called like a pattern of learning design. So these guys are talking a lot about patterns of learning design. Now, in the center of the slide, and I put this on purpose, is a very seminal work by Professor Diana Lorirat from the Knowledge Lab at the University of London. It's a book called Teaching as a Design Science. And for all of us that we know Diana's work, she's been publishing in that space now for approximately 20 years, if not more. But her conversational theory and conversational framework is the key thing of the learning design. So Diane actually keeps it to a higher level at this stage in that book, and he invites academics and teachers and professionals to see teaching as a design science and use a particular framework that she developed as a guiding principles for the design. Next to it, another seminal work by Australian this time, in particular Peter Goodyear. That's a 2017, I think, publication, the newest one, that talks about epistemic fluency in professional development. And again, this book comes with a very particular framework, which we'll be talking about it in a bit, that is being used extensively by, obviously, the team that Peter runs at the University of Sydney, but also across the world. Next to it, another book by Grania Connolly. She's now a consultant in the UK, but previously she held a number of positions at Leicester and Bath University. She's well known for doing a lot of design training herself as a consultant. The book Designing for Learning in an Open World takes a very particular view of how design can work a lot in informal education as well and the formal one. Finally, from Macquarie University, Design of Technology Enhanced Learning by Associate Professor Matt Bauer, who is in the School of Educational Studies here. Now, Matt, I think, published this book only a couple of months ago, if I'm right. And what's fascinating about the book is that it provides a very interesting cluster, as he calls them, cluster of concerns about learning design, pretty much issues and challenges that academics and teachers face when it comes to learning design, and his recommendation that it should be down to the individual people to be left with these clusters of concerns in order to make sense and address them from a very local contextual setting. So we move from the top, from the left, the learning design, a more holistic, more global approach to learning design, all the way to a more personal, allow me to say, contextual approach to learning design that Matt Bauer. But all of these things are available, are used, are valid, are reliable, and are researched. The big question is, are there commonalities and are there extreme opinions about learning design there? Eva, over to you if there's anything to add in particular for this slide.
Yes, I just wanted to say that this is a very nice collection. It's a very contemporary collection of texts. If people look into those, there are many people who have been part of the authoring of the first one, have been also part of the authoring of the other textbooks. And they have gone on and developed their own style and their own ideas, which interestingly does not automatically align with the original learning design textbook philosophy, but may even contradict some of these aspects, and we will be talking about those in a minute.
Perfect, thank you. So this slide was pretty much about seminal text, complete work, and complete work I mean like full books with cases, ideas that they give. Now, if we zoom in into the philosophies and the frameworks of these books, here we have two of the most well-used and well-referenced frameworks that at least are used from people in Australia, the US, the UK, but also in Asia extensively. And we will spend just a few minutes, starting with Eva and then with me, about what actually do they represent. And I think what is important for us as a community of learning designers or researchers in learning design is to understand what is the role of a framework, why actually do we develop these conceptual frameworks, and how they have been used. So we will start with the Larnaca Declaration on Learning Design framework, which is the conceptual map we can see on the left. You can zoom in, and I will let Eva talk us about how did they arrive with that and what is happening with this framework we see.
So the Larnaca Declaration on Learning Design was actually developed in Larnaca itself, and it was a group of people, a group of experts who worked in this space, trying to align their understanding and come up with a visual representation of what learning design is, what it means, and how we can move it forward. And since it was very, very robust discussions that we have when we developed this particular model, and trying to integrate our own individual ideas and about what learning design is and how it is aligned with philosophy, with objectives and granularity and so forth. So if you can have a look at the centerpiece, it says the core concepts of learning design, which are guidance, representation and sharing. Most interestingly, if you look at these particular keywords, and they are not in the definitions at this point in time in the list that we showed you earlier. So maybe this is something that we need to revisit when we talk about definitional constructs and the idea of what it is that we want in a definition. And then if you look at the left-hand side, it talks about educational philosophy, theories and methodologies, and learning environments, characteristics and values. So theories and methodologies, although go together, the theory becomes really central for a methodology. And the theory has to have a very clear philosophical underpinning. And this is where we have most had a lot of debates about the pedagogical neutrality idea, or is it possible or desirable to have this idea of pedagogical neutrality like the notation system, where it doesn't really matter what kind of ontology and epistemology you subscribe to, you just have a notation and you can then do with those what you want. Is this really still current? Is this something that we need? So that's something that we've played on in the blog that will be published next week. And then we have, from the philosophical perspective on the left, we move into the center, which is all about the teaching cycle, which is all about the process of design, engaging, runtime, reflection, and so forth. That's a circling kind of activity where most practitioners are really interested in. So they're interested in the centerpiece. They may or may not be that interested in the philosophical and theoretical underpinnings. And then also the level of granularity is really important. Is it program level, module level, session level? Is it a particular activity that we design for? How do these all align with each other? Then the implementations, we look at, there are a number of tools and resources available. And then, of course, they need to be also linked to other theoretical concepts. For example, learning analytics. A lot of work is done at this point in time, which links learning design with learning analytics, and a new concept that has just been introduced by Dirk Iffenthaler from Mannheim University, which is learning analytics design. So when we mesh all of these ideas together, it becomes really complex and also quite interesting. So I'll leave it at this for the time, and I'll hand over to Panos.
Thanks a lot, Eva. I will just now talk you through on the second part of the slide, which is actually the ACAD framework, which is part of the architecture of productive learning networks work done by Carvalho and Goodyear in 2014. Now, the starting point for this particular design or learning design framework is that the center of the activity is actually the activity itself. That's why they can see they are in the center with little dotted points. They somehow manage to ring fence what actually is the activity that takes place in any kind of learning sequence. And then they try to situate this activity in relation to the physical space, including, however, also the digital spaces, so the physicality of it, and all the social domains, which involves how people are interacting, but also the different groupings, the dynamics of the groups, and so on. But they position all of it as part of their intentional design, which is a design that takes part as part of an educational experience. So the linear thing in the center, tasks, activity, outcomes, is very much the desirable, the one that we, the designers, the academics, we intend to put in place for some other people, our learners, to learn. So this is the intentional space. What they argue, though, is that there's a number of other unintentional things that they happen and that we cannot really design, but we can design for. So the framework leaves us with the understanding that like a designer, an academic, a professional member of a team that is happy to design for something, they should have very clear ideas about what they want to see as part of a design, but they should also be prepared to accommodate changes or unintended things that they might happen in the space of the activity related to the physicality or the social aspects. It is not necessarily a very new concept to us, because a number of us have been advocating the fact that at the end of the day is the activity that matters. At the end of the day is what is happening in real time with real students that matters, and we cannot 100% control or design for this. So I can see a lot of similarities between, if you want, the two frameworks we can see in that case. The difference is that the learning design conceptual map, which we see on the left, the one from the Larnaca Declaration, recognizes to some extent also the everyday reality of academia, which is the idea that there's a lot of bureaucracy, there is a lot of levels of granularity, as they put it there. The module, the session, the activities, the program. It's not just the activity. It's a number of other things that we should be able to have a design philosophy around before we try to attempt it. But we all agree that at the end of the day, what matters is the learning that takes place out of a particular activity. So I'll leave it to that space, unless, Eva, you want to comment something on the ACAD framework?
No, I just wanted to add that it is really interesting that both of these frameworks don't have a particular theoretical underpinning, so that they share quite a lot with each other, as Panos said. And the activity in the center, it's not the task design, but the activity which incorporates the task and the student interaction, or student and teacher interaction in this, is the teaching cycle of the framework.
Perfect, thank you very much. So we've seen in the previous slide some seminal books and authors, which is reassuring that we are doing a lot in that space. We are publishing, so we are moving the discourse and the research in that space, which is great. We've seen now two important frameworks that they have been both put in use one way or another, either as a part of research or in everyday practice of designers. Now let's move a bit to another interesting domain, which is the idea of the tools. And it's interesting to see what is the role that a tool, either a digital tool or a printed version like a template, plays in the process of trying to make sense or operationalize and learning design. So I have here, again, three tools that they do exist. Some of them actually they cease operation, but I will explain why. And I will take them in terms of chronological order here, and then I will leave Eva to talk about the LAMS tool that she's very familiar with. So if you see in the center of the slide, we have a pedagogical planner that's called Phoebe. I don't know how many of you heard of, but it is one of the most well, it was, allow me to correct myself, it was one of the most well-referenced tools that existed in the literature. It was a fully online, so it was through a website. That's why you can see here a screenshot, including the website. Everything was actually from a web browser. And it was a tool that allowed a number of academics, in particular universities in the UK initially, to go there and start developing a complete lesson plan. So the focus of FIB was very much on the level of a lesson plan, coming from the philosophy of school education, I have to admit, from what at least I've seen and I work with, and allows and navigates teachers through a sequence of decisions they have to make about releasing a lesson plan and eventually an activity to a student. Now, on the left one, we have, if you want, a more updated version of that. Interestingly enough, they both are associated with a conversational model of Diana's Lorilat work. So the latest work, which is the Pedagogy Planner, has a lot to do with the Phoebe's approach in terms of has a very kind of linear sequential approach to learning design. You can see here, if you zoom in on the left, that you know, there's particular things to assign to a particular design, including the different roles that the people play, the hours, the type of activity you do a discussion and practice and so on. But all of them, in a way, are pre-populated in this big template of the pedagogical planner. So academics are asked, or teachers are asked, to make decisions about real learning design using pre-existing underpinnings. And then we have LAMS that, from the way that even if you see it on the screen, appears to be more open and conceptual, in that academics and teachers, they are allowed to mix and match different things and create their own sequence. But I will leave it to Eva to explain a bit more about how it works and what is the state of LAMS at the moment before I make some other comments about them.
Yes, thank you, Panos. Well, LAMS stands for Learning Activity Management System, and it bore out of the idea that the learning management systems, particularly the old versions that the universities used, was pure management. So the focus was on the management of learning, whereas what we really needed in technology enhanced learning at the time was the focus not on management or the tool, but the focus on pedagogy. And the way that LAMS was designed was to visualize the pedagogical implications of particular designs. And then the beauty of LAMS is also that you can make very simple designs or very complex designs, and then you can copy them, and it's very easy to design something from a visual perspective and then have run times that students then can walk through. It is a very linear design as well. So the swim lane approach of LAMS and the reusability of LAMS sequences are particular features that are very attractive. And maybe we can also invite Leanne, who is, she was actually my teacher in LAMS many, many years ago, who can maybe also add something to this.
I think Leanne left the room around 5 minutes ago because she had another commitment.
Oh, no problem. So if you're interested in reviewing, there's a lot of research on LAMS, and there were particular LAMS conferences that were also conducted in the early 2000s until 2010 or 11, I guess. So you can see a lot of research in this space.
Great. Now, if I'm allowed, Eva, and then you please step in as well, I would try to turn a bit this point to a more of a critical discussion about the role of tools and planners, primarily because it's interesting to observe the generation and death of these tools over a number of years. So Phoebe is one of the most interesting examples, because if any of you now, you leave this room today and you go and you look for Phoebe's, it still exists as a website. I mean, you can still find an archive of it, but it clearly says that Phoebe ceased operation. It was part of a particular project. It served the purposes of the project, and now it moved to a potentially a new version, which is a Pedagogical Planner. Pedagogical Planner is running, but is running under the umbrella and the control of a particular organization with a particular philosophy and mentality. And my understanding is that LAMS was part of the LAMS Foundation that existed at Macquarie University. However, as a foundation, I'm not quite sure where we are with and how much more is happening in that space, which leaves me as a designer and academic myself with a big question about, is this the best time and effort, the collective effort of all these people spent on designing this kind of tools, that they seem to share a lot of things in common, but at the end of the day, they appear to be part of projects, or we, the design community in Australia, but also globally, we should be aspiring to create something more sustainable, like tools that somehow they belong to bigger umbrellas, big consortia, big ideas, where people, they can keep moving and working with them. In other words, and I'm honest here, it's not a matter of 1, 2, or 3 people that they control this to set it up, run it, and then if they decide that there's no interest in that space, to resign the tool, but the tools, they become part of the everyday practice. Eva, any comments on that, in particular with what's happening with LAMS nowadays?
Yes, LAMS is still active, and Lesson LAMS is still used all over the world. But as you said rightly, James Dalcia, who's been the driver at has left Macquarie University, so it just slowed down quite considerably, and there's also no more LAMS conferences in this space. This said, there is a great interest from large learning management systems to actually embrace what we have done in this space, in particularly learning activity management system and the pedagogical focus. And they're interested in taking up some of these. So Moodle, and in discussion with Martin at this point in time of putting these ideas into the Moodle framework and using them there.
Perfect. I mean, and that was where I was coming from. So whether there is an appetite and a desire for all these interesting tools and templates that have been developed over the years, how we can make sure that they actually become part of a bigger initiatives, whether this initiative will be under a university or a learning management system or something like that. Because it's pity to observe all this effort with all these designs. For example, Phoebe, I think last time I did some design for it a few years ago, it had a good hundreds of designs there that we don't really know how they've been archived and how they've been approached. So there is a big discussion about the effort we put, what do we make of it, and how do we maintain the momentum. And I leave it here in terms of tools and planners. Unless if there's any other comments?
No, there's nothing.
Okay, perfect. Now,
excuse me, Panos, Dan just provided the link to Phoebe. Thank you, Dan.
Oh, great. It'll be interesting to see if they have the archive there, because that was one of the things that we're working on. That would be great. Now, making the connection. Books and ideas and frameworks on the one side, which is at the conceptual level, operationalized attempts through tools, either online or face-to-face tools, templates and booklets and so on, for facilitating and initiating a learning design approach. And then we have a number of what I can call at this stage an approach, although they might end up at some point become methodologies, but definitely a number of approaches and processes that they also deal with learning design. And I have here 3 of those, 2 that I'm extremely familiar with because I was either part of designing them and also part from reviewing parts of it, and 1 which I became familiar quite recently. So I will start with the Carpe Diem approach to learning design, initiated, I think, at the University of Leicester when Professor Ddi Salmon was at the University of Leicester in the UK, and then it's been transferred in a number of places in the UK, but also in Australia when she arrived. There's a full online website with videos, templates, booklets, very robust approach in terms of trying to implement a learning design as a team. Now, the big thing about the Carpe Diem is that it has a very particular duration. So it promises a learning design outcome within a series of 2 full days of effort. It invites academics and professionals and anyone else interested in the learning design to be part of the same room. And I witnessed the buzz, and it's a beautiful buzz that happens when all these people are together. But it takes the learning design up to a particular level. As you can expect, within 2 days of work, there is so much we can do. On the right side, we have the ABC curriculum design, and this is from the University College London. Again, a very similar approach to the Carpe Diem, still with visualizing, with sticky papers, come together, storyboarding, all the essential things are there. This time, the ABC curriculum promises within 90 minutes, an hour and a half, very rapid, come together in order to conceptualize learning design and make some sense. And then on the bottom of it, we have the Ddi methodology, which I took the initiative to develop here at Macquarie in 2014. And the Ddi approach to learning design was an attempt to become slightly more, allow me to say, more pragmatic in terms of what can be achieved in any time frame. So I worked closely with Professor Ddi Salmon at the time that she was at Swinburne and then moved to Western Australia to see if I take the Carpe Diem, what actually does it deliver in terms of outputs? What can I do in 1 day? What I can do in 2 days, all the way to 3, 4, 6, 7 months. And the Ddi ended up with a more holistic approach to say to an academic team, this is what you can do if you invest X amount of time and you follow a very particular way of thinking by doing your storyboarding. And this is what needs to be done after this learning design approach takes place in order to complete it. But none of us, and I'm happy to see if someone has done it, but that's a big question for us. Eva and me will be talking about it now for a year. None of us who have come with a very pragmatic methodology that tells you how you should be collaborating, for how long and to what end. So we all promise a number of outputs, but the mix and match of the different elements of the learning design in terms of a methodology that can be given to someone else to run is not 100% clear. So we are claiming that there is a gap in the space of a methodological underpinning for learning design that can deliver different things. And it might be many methodologies, but there might be one methodology, and we'll come back to it. Eva, anything to add in this space?
No, I think you summarized it really well. What is really bothering me when I look at all of those is that these so-called methodologies seem to be points in time. So they seem to be very objectivist, or they take an objectivist philosophical position. So they assume that there is one clear understanding of learning design and let's just go and do it. But as we can see and everyone knows in this room, that there are so many interpretations and variations in what learning design is. There's no way we can come up with a methodology that we can then replicate and reuse in a productive manner.
Yeah, that's a good point. And if I'm allowed, I will give you my most recent experience by using the Ddi in my university, where we follow, if you go on the typical approach of the Ddi, which is a modified version of the Carpe Diem, with 3 different teams of academics, but for 3 different needs, if you're going to call it like that. One was very much about designing an activity. One was very much about designing a series of activities within a particular program. And the other one was about a totally like industry-related activity. Following the same so-called methodology that we developed, we ended up reaching different results and in different time frames, ranging from 3 months to 9 months. So when then we were asked to report back to the teams, if we were to replicate this, to do it again, can you tell us what is needed, for how long, and what we should expect? We were not really in a position to say that. And this is one of the biggest limitations of the learning design at this stage when it comes to be adopted across a university or across a sector. Is that all right, guys? I will move on with this question.
Yeah, let's move because of time.
Time, yes. Now, so we know, so quickly summarizing, we've seen all these beautiful frameworks and ideas and books. But it comes to the bottom line, okay, are there particular reasons for why we do one way or another? For example, using the model from Gillis-Salmon as opposed to the Ddi, or using the ACAD framework as opposed to the conceptual framework from the Larka Declaration. So Eva put in the blog that comes next week a comprehensive list of definitions. And only reading the definitions, you will get an idea about the variety of interpretations. So if I leave it to you maybe to go through some of them as they belong to the list that you created.
Sure. So if we start with Gillis-Salmon's 4th one from the bottom, from the top, it says, in order to design something, I think it is great to design something that is user-friendly and can be used in a particular context straight away. But it doesn't say that it actually is something that will be reused, whereas when we look at, or represented for someone else to use. So if you look at the next one up, where it says to create representations of teaching and learning practice. So it is more about representing what is actually happening, so for other people to understand what's going on. And then maybe we move even more up. It is in order to devise new practices, plans and activities and resources aimed to achieve particular educational aims in a given context. So this is still very context dependent. And then if you look at my definition in 2013, I really want to make explicit that we can't just design for a particular activity in a particular context, but what we want to do is we want to make explicit the integration between epistemology and technology or ontology as well, if we want to do so. So we are able then to redesign, repurpose, and reuse these designs in different and alternate contexts. So this is where I'm coming from. And then the last one is in order to provide program teams the space and aim to explicitly integrate the language, practice, and tools for learning design. So the focus is there on the language, the practice, and the tool, which is from my perspective quite similar to the first one, which also talks about the epistemological, ontological, and technological integration attempts.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I mean, it's very interesting even reading them again now with you to see the variation. And that variation to some way reflects if you want, any kind of philosophical underpinning and associated tools and templates and things that the particular authors of this work actually have followed, which leave us with this kind of plurality that we all talk about and whether this is useful or not. But I will move a bit with the next slide just to see where the commonalities are. It seems that to some extent, all of us will have, although not always explicitly, some pedagogical underpinnings. Some frameworks of learning design are more constructivist and social constructivist, meaning they are more around coming together as a team and build, than others, where, for example, they will expect individuals to give it a go before they go and serve. But there is a pedagogical underpinning, and constructivism and social constructivism are the key pedagogies that they will influence the learning design. Templates, digital or paper-based, and in the templates I also include any kind of guidelines and booklets that we can give to academics in order to work with. They do exist, and I think I've seen them in every single learning design work that I've done, but also I witness in this country. Process. This is where it becomes very interesting, because some of the processes, they do demand, and by demand I mean there's no other way of doing it, a lot of collaboration at different stages and with different stakeholders, but others, they put a focus more on individuals trying to sort out their own contextual issues before they ended up in a collaboration. But in any way, there is some sort of a process, not always methodologically addressed or a complete methodology, but definitely there are processes. And all of us, we do have an expectation for an output. Most likely the output is to design something tangible, an activity or a lesson plan or something like that, or we can even move to create a sequence of them and map them across a whole of program. And I think the sector is moving more to more holistic program map where activities are mapped as a sequence of a number of activities. However, the implementation of all of this, matching the right underpinnings with the right templates and the right processes, in other ways, creating a methodology around it, is something that we still don't get right, or we don't get complete, to put it to be more fair to my colleagues and myself. And so another component is the evaluation of learning design, which we, the people who are doing research in that space, we're also concerned. To what extent do we get enough data and enough, if you want, information about the complete success or not of a learning design? We do get information about levels of satisfaction using how well the template has been done, but following through to the end product, which is the development of the activity, the run of the activity by the students, and the evaluation, it's something that we don't do really well at this stage. But over to Eva in case there is something that I missed out or misrepresented.
Fine, I'm happy to move on because of time, Panos.
Yes, great. Which pretty much we think that the three things that we do or we should be aspiring to do better are find ways through a learning design methodology to collaborate in a systematic and consistent way and transparent, to be able to share in one way or another, and to be able to reuse. And I will come back to that reuse through the discussion, I hope, because it's very important to know what actually is the thing that we're using. So the big question here for us is, with all this beautiful conceptual plurality and definitional and variety of processes, should we, the Australian and the international learning design community, attempt to have a definitional clarity, or are we just happy to accept that it is what it is and we can live with that?
Yes, and I'd like to add that this is the key question that has been taken out of the blog. And we would like to invite you to give us some feedback on your ideas about the possibility of conceptual unity, and is this the way forward, or are we happy with the status quo, which is conceptual plurality?
Perfect. So is that a good point, Eva, to open up for any comments and address them? Either to the microphone? Yeah.
Very much so. And I also would like to add that Dan, thank you, has also made a point saying that, more to the point, universities don't share the outcomes from these implementations. So even if there are implementations of learning designs, we don't seem to share them. I actually think that the people who are working in the learning design space make them available. The problem is that we don't have a central repository, so it's really hard to find them.
Yes, yeah, that's a good point. So over to the audience now. And either you can grab your microphone and comment on anything, but definitely would like to get the feel in this room of whether you do share the same, well, I'm not going to call them concerns, but definitely you do share the same points that we make about the plethora of ideas, or we are happy with what we're doing and we can keep moving in our own direction. You can type or grab the microphone.
It's Dan Lawrence here. I'd like to make a point if I might.
Please, Dan.
There is quite a few other, I guess, frameworks out there as well, including the Quality Matters framework, which is quite widely used, the CDI framework as well. But they're all fairly similar in several regards. Some of them are more sort of rubric-based, sort of evaluative type programs. But yeah, the methodologies, some of them are less processes and more evaluation methods. So it's there's sort of a bit of a plethora there of different sort of methodologies, I guess. An evaluation is always difficult. I know a lot of universities would also like to share more about what they do, but the corporate side of the university has issues around privacy and tracking data, and particularly in this regulatory environment with various bits of national legislation floating about that affect things. It's always difficult getting satisfaction scores and sharing them. So I'll just point out those little difficulties. Thanks. Yeah, otherwise great coverage. Cheers.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you. Eva, any comments on that yourself?
Yes, Dan. I think what we are more interested in is not the actual evaluation of the runtime of particular activities, but we can do those through research and de-identify the university. So that shouldn't be a problem, and I think it is actually done. But what we are more interested in is the conceptual ideas. How can we move the learning design community forward if we have such diversity and disparity of conceptual understandings and methods that we are using to move forward? And as Panos introduced before, Matt Bauer, a colleague of ours who's also been working in this space, actually argues for just a contextual approach. So everyone does their own little thing, but Panos and I, and I'm sure some others, also think that to move this field forward, what we need is more clarity about underpinning ideals and ideas, so we can develop particular processes that then can be replicated and evaluated, and through an iterative process moved forward.
That's a great point, and I can imagine, Eva, from our institutional positions as associate deans, to me it became clear that when it comes to discuss anything around curriculum, the universities are getting more and more demanding in terms of accurately monitoring the process of thinking about a program all the way to evaluating, including all the learning design that takes place. And this is where I'm getting a bit even more frustrated when I see that, well, but each university, they have some way of doing it, but we cannot really do some comparative research or something to say that as a sector we are moving towards the right direction, because everybody at the end of the day they are getting what they want from their own design, but is this good enough?
If I may say, Hazel says, is the development of such a repository a possible aim? There are multiple repositories, but they are tied to particular tools, and that's the problem. And then you also talk about design-based research, which could be an underpinning. But design-based research has, over the years, very clear methodologies. And this is where we come in and say, are we in a space where we can now develop very clear methodologies that are underpinned by epistemological and ontological frameworks that are solid and that are not neutral? So when we look at the Larnaca Declaration, for example, they really state very clearly that they adhere, or I was part of it, adhere to pedagogical neutrality. Is this still the case? Do we still need to adhere to or want to pedagogical neutrality, which can also be read as conceptual plurality? Or is there a time where we need to adhere to particular conceptual clarity and move forward so we can start developing methodologies that are inclusive for everyone? Okay, the first question in SIG. I'm not quite sure, Hazel, what you mean. If you can either use your mic or if you can explain what you mean about the SIG, would be really interested as a SIG leader what you mean there.
In the meantime, if other people have any comments or other questions, it would be good to know. I mean, from our point of view, Eva and myself, and Liane that left as well, we came together on a number of occasions to think, especially because I'm new to Australia myself, and I'm trying to make sense of the sector. And it's fascinating to see that this definitional potpourri or plurality, it is helpful in a way that allows us to bring our own institutional approaches to it, but to some extent provides us with the same challenges. So we're all fighting the same problems again and again. Okay. Hazel put a comment there.
So Hazel says, could SIG take responsibility through ASCILITE to develop a repository of different designs for sharing? As I said before, there are so many designs out there, but what we as a SIG would like to do is move forward where we can then share particular common understandings and then use the particular designs to test our understandings and develop particular theory moving forward together. If you're interested in designs, the best way to go is to read the research that has been done by the nominal people that have that Panos showed in slide number 5, I think.
I mean, I have to say the comment that Hazel puts there, it's an interesting one because, as we mentioned, the repository, it's this idea of what is that we want as a community to share and what actually is reusable, which brings a number of questions around the role of the templates. And for example, is it worthwhile sharing just the templates and the instruments that we are using? Or is it important to share a complete learning design, whatever we take this to mean, a complete sequence or lesson with our assessments and everything? And to what extent someone can grab a learning design that's been made at Macquarie University and plug it in, allow me to say, over to Curtin? Or is it a matter of creating this kind of approach where people, they can at least collaborate, have the ability to adjust their own designs, create some annotations, some notes, and then put them over for other people to reuse. I'm fascinated when I read research, for example, from the Pedagogical Planner at the University of London, where Chinese academics, they say that we use learning designs from the UK or from Australia, we put them in action, we evaluate them, and they worked. And I cannot resist thinking, but there must be something that took place between you taking this template, this learning design, and putting it in practice, unless we are talking about globalized, or what Etienne Wenger would call reified approaches to learning design, where they are neutral and they can be plugged in everything. Eva, any comments on that? About how general or how specific should the learning designs be?
Well, I actually have written about those. I've talked about transdisciplinary pedagogical templates. So yes. Templates, and I've also worked in the template space for a number of years. So they are out there and they can be replicated, repurposed in the way that people would like to do. We only have 4 more minutes, Panos, so yes. I suggest that we move on to the last 2 slides.
Well, I suppose this is an important slide that moves the area forward. Eva, over to you.
Thank you. So we are actively working on an AJ special issue on learning design, which will be published in early 2018 as it looks. We had great interest and a lot of papers that have come through us to this special issue, and it gives a very nice overview of design work and the struggle that people have, and also what they are doing and solutions they're proposing in this space of learning design to move the field forward. So please look out for this special issue and also for the announcement of the special issue, and particularly if people who are new to this space, if they want to take note of the learning designers who are working in this particular space internationally, then that would be a very nice start to have a look at this. And with this, I really would like to thank everyone who has attended today's webinar, and I invite everyone to stay in contact and keep the discussion going. If you'd like to join our mailing list for the Learning Design SIG, so please do so if you're not already on it. And we're also going to be at ASCILITE, so you can also talk to us while we're at ASCILITE. We have a special SIG meeting, and we also have a number of learning design sessions at ASCILITE this year.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Eva. I also want to take my turn to thank everyone for being online with us this afternoon, and I hope that we provided enough stimuli to keep the discussion going, and we hope that as a SIG and as a community, we will continue to grow and do brilliant things as we always do. Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks a lot, guys, again. We will stay as the host until everybody disappears, and then we'll disconnect.
Thanks. Panos, stay on so we can chat after.
Yes, absolutely. Once the recording stopped.